Hello guys, and welcome back again to another episode of the Babylonian Crypto channel. Today we're going to talk about Ethereum, and recently Ethereum has been quite hyped out because everybody is anticipating the merge, which is happening around June of this year. So the merge is the transition of Ethereum towards the ETH 2.0 and proof of stake. So that is just one part of Ethereum. That is just one catalyst, but the other catalyst is actually the L2 scaling solutions. So you can see over here on L2Bit website that there are a lot of all these different projects with all these different technology, zk, optimistic, and it's kind of confusing because right now there really isn't a big overview ecosystem showing where all these projects stands. So the purpose of this video is to map out the whole ecosystem and better understand where all these L2 rollup solutions fit together and where do they stand as of right now. So before we begin, this is just a quick overview of the problem. So right now, most blockchains are under this monolithic architecture. So there are three components to a blockchain. One is execution, which is the processing and computation of the transactions. Second is where are all these data being stored and how can we reference them. And third is consensus. So consensus is just can we agree that this state is accurate and factual. So that is basically the three components. And now layer 2 is about moving towards this modular architecture, and what it essentially means is splitting up all these components and outsourcing it to somewhere else where they are more efficient and more specialized in the work that they do. So in particular, layer 2 is actually outsourcing this execution part and to some extent this data availability part. So we send all these transactions to L2, let them process and do all these transactions off chain. Once they are done, then they send over back to Ethereum. So in that way, we export all these very heavy computation off chain. So in that way, we can help the network to scale, to reduce gas fees, to improve speed and improve scalability without sacrificing decentralization. So that is just the whole idea of how L2 works. So right now, the solution to do this is actually called rollups. So rollup essentially is just rolling up all these transactions into one single batch and then pushing them onto Ethereum L1 chain in one single transaction. So maybe another diagram to better illustrate this is here. So Ethereum, these are all the block, it's a blockchain. So between block 0 and block 1, there will be a lot of people submitting transactions to the network, right? So all these transactions are now done by L2. So L2, they will roll up all these transactions, batch them together, and then from state 0 to state 1, once they are done, they push the state to Ethereum. Ethereum rollup contract updates to the new state, and then this continues on. So right now, the next question is how do we know that whatever data that is pushed over from L2 is actually true, is actually accurate? And right now, the two main solutions are called optimistic rollups, and the second one is called zk-Rollup. So one uses fraud proof and the other one uses validity proof. Okay, so the main difference between optimistic rollup and zk-Rollups is like this, okay? So optimistic rollup is you give me all the work, I will help you to sort and arrange all these transactions, then I'll give it back to you. So you just trust me, and that's why it's called optimistic, right? You just trust me, and if you have any issues, feel free to dispute me and challenge me, and I'll give you 1 to 2 weeks time for you to check. So it is innocent until proven guilty, and then submit first, verify later, and then this is called fraud proof. So whenever I submit all these transactions, I have to actually deposit a ETH bond. And whenever somebody wants to challenge me, they also have to deposit ETH as a bond. So whenever there's a challenge, let's say if the person who challenged me is wrong, then he loses his ETH, his bond. But let's say his challenge is correct and I'm wrong, then I lose my Ethereum. So that is essentially how optimistic rollup works. But zk-Rollup is you give me all the work, I will check every single detail, and I will come out with a mathematical proof that everything is correct. You don't have to trust me. I've already done all these complex calculations for you already. The proof is there and it's all based on math and cryptography. There are no errors. So optimistic rollups is faster in that sense because they don't have to do so much computation, so much checking. They just assume everything is correct, right? they are faster in processing transaction, but zk-Rollup is slower because they have to do more work, they are more serious. But when it comes to finality, which means the consensus part, whether this state is final, confirmed, and irreversible, then zk-Rollup is much faster because zk-Rollup, everything that's submitted is already 100% correct and confirmed. But optimistic, you still have to wait 1-2 weeks, and that's a big trade-off for optimistic rollups for now. So here is a table that is written by Vitalik in his article. So you can see that zk-Rollups is much more expensive because they have to do more work, right, to do all this check. But optimistic rollup is much cheaper, but then the withdrawal is very fast. But optimistic, you still have to wait for weeks to see whether there are people disputing and whether the outcome of the dispute is right or wrong. So these are the first two differences that we talk about. And then the third difference is EVM compatibility. So optimistic rollup is EVM compatible, and zk-Rollup is much more specific to applications and transactions, not so much for EVM compatibility, but that is going to change as we will talk about later. So you can see over here, Vitalik says that my view is that in the short term, optimistic rollups are likely to win because of EVM computation, and zk-Rollups are likely to win for simple payments, application-specific use case. However, in the medium to long term, zk-Rollups will win out in all cases. So this is his view that zk is better than optimistic in the long term, and zk is a more sound solution. As you can see over here, it makes more logical sense to have finality rather than this back and forth of checking, right? And this definitely sounds like a better idea. So here is the big overview map that I've done out for L2 rollup solutions. So first you have optimistic and zk-Rollups, and the difference between them is the way they verify proof. So optimistic rollup is based on fraud proof, game theory and economic incentive. Then zk-Rollup is based on validity proof, which is based on math and cryptography. And another good thing about zk-Rollup is that it has privacy feature from their zero knowledge tag, which is not found in optimistic rollups. And then in crypto, there are always different competing factions and different camps and different competitors, right? So the same thing happens also for L2 rollup solutions. The competition is not just between optimistic rollup and zk-Rollup. Within optimistic rollups, there's also Optimism and Off-Chain Labs. And Off-Chain Labs is Arbitrum. So the difference is how they resolve these dispute resolutions during that 1-2 week. So within Optimism, there's optimistic Ethereum, and then there's also Optimism forks like Metis, Boba, and then Off-Chain is just Arbitrum. So the advantage of Metis and Boba is to actually reduce that withdrawal time, and they also have like other advantage which we will not talk about. And within zk-Rollups, there are two different camps. So one is MetaLabs, which is zk-Sync, and the other one is Starkware. So the difference between the two is the technology they use. So one is use zk-Snark, the other one is use zk-Stacks. And then within them, you can see that MetaLabs is developing the zk-Sync, and then Starkware is developing StarkX. So this is the first gen, and then this is the second generation, which is the next iteration, like the next upgrade. So zk-Sync 2.0 is the upgrade for MetaLabs, and then StarkNet is for Starkware. So this is already on public testnet, and this is already also live, the StarkNet Alpha. So that's the big overview of all the different L2 solutions. And within zk-Rollups, there's also another component to look at, and that is the data availability part. So Starkware gives you three options. So one is you store all the data on-chain like a typical zk-Rollup. Second, you store all this data off-chain, and we call that Validium. And they have a data community for this to store all this data off-chain. And then third is actually a hybrid. So there are different trade-offs between storing data on-chain and off-chain, but basically data as much as possible should be stored on-chain. That would be best, but then the trade-off is that it takes up more space, lower speed and all. But then if you store it off-chain, you can increase your speed, but at the expense of security, because now you have to depend on another party to make sure that all this data is not tampered with, is correct. And for MetaLabs, they have their own solution called zk Portal. So zk portal is storing all this data off-chain. So this is the equivalent of Validium on Starkware. So they will store all this data off-chain, which will be guarded by incentives also through all these guardians. So zk-Sync will have their own token for this purpose, and they are the only project here that publicly tell everyone that we will be launching a token. The rest right now is no comments. So coming back to the difference between Optimism and Arbitrum, this is the main difference. So you can see that this is Arbitrum way of checking things during a dispute. So let's say when they push all these transactions over, right, and somebody challenge it. So they will use a recursive algorithm to go back and forth, basically to narrow down where exactly is the problem. So let's say from here, H0 to Hn, the center part is wrong. So we start from there. And then they go, okay, so H0 to Hn2, this is the part where it's wrong. Then we zoom in there. And then over here, we zoom in. So they will zoom in, narrow down, and find where exactly is the problem. Once they found it, then they will post that problem onto L1 Ethereum. So in that sense, Optimism is much faster, because what Optimism does is it sends the whole thing onto L1. It doesn't go back and forth to check all these things. Arbitrum actually checks all these things off chain, so actually it's much cheaper for Arbitrum because it is doing all this computation off chain. It only posts the small little problem to L1 Ethereum, and that's only the on-chain cost. But Optimism, they have to post the whole thing, right? So it is going to be more costly, but Optimism is much faster. So it's called single round for Optimism, and Arbitrum is called multi-round. So that is like the main difference between Arbitrum and Optimism, is the way they resolve this dispute resolution. Okay, so now we'll talk about the main difference between Starks and Snarks, and these two are actually like big competitor, always competing with each other, even though both of them are under the zk-Rollup camp. So Snark stands for zero knowledge, succinct, non-interactive argument of knowledge. So you notice this word non-interactive here. So it essentially means that once I submit the proof, the validity proof, it is done. It is complete, right? There's no sort of interaction. But you see, like in the previous case of optimistic rollups, it's actually interactive. And people go back and forth and challenge what is true, what is not true. But for them, is whatever I show you is based on math is true. So here are the main difference between Snarks and Starks. So Snarks actually requires a trusted setup, and this is one of the big argument against Snark, right? Because even though it's based on math, it's based on cryptography, but you require somebody to set up the key, to create the logic, to create what is right, what is wrong, to create, all these rules. And if this key is not destroyed, then somebody can tamper with, right? But their counter argument is there are no systems without some form of trusted setup. Our computer, our web browser, our wallet is all also, based on all this code and setup, right? Nobody goes and verify whether the way the computer works is correct. So that's their way of thinking. And Stark improvisation is, this T is actually stands for transparent. So there will be no trusted setup for Stark. It's actually based on some publicly verifiable randomness to create all this computation. And then Stark is also actually more powerful, more scalable, but it requires a larger proof size. So Stark is actually a improvised version of Snark, and they are created by Israelis, very brilliant people, very smart people. I would recommend reading the book Israeli Startup Nation or something. It gives a very good insight on how the Israeli people think. But that's beside the point. So Stark is more scalable, but it requires a bigger proof size. But this proof size can be amortized as more transactions, more people use it. So Snark is requires lesser proof size, but it needs a trusted setup, and then it is also not quantum secure because they are based on elliptic curve, and there are many people debating that in the future quantum security can actually break elliptic curve logic. But then Starks is actually based on hashing function, which has been already better tested. And another difference is Starkware actually has their own programming language called Cairo, but zk-Sync is more focused on EVM compatibility. So you can see over here that they actually think that it doesn't make sense for you to port over all your Solidity codes over to L2. And the reason is because it is based on a different set of constraints, different environment, so it doesn't make much sense. And it's better to start from a blank sheet of paper to code from scratch. And this is what DYDX did. So here is a overview of all the different competitors: Starkware, Metal Labs, Offchain, and Optimism. And right now, Starkware has the highest funding. You can see that their last round is Series C, and they are actually going to do a Series D soon. They are going to raise 100 million, and I think the valuation is going to be 6 to 8 billion. And then for reference, consensus is about 7 billion, Near Protocol 7 billion, Cosmos 8 billion. And right now, that is their valuation range already. And Optimism also just finished their Series B. They just raised 150 million. Right now, the valuation is about 1.65 billion. So right now, Starkware is actually the most well-funded, has the highest valuation, and it is the most promising technology recognized by the market right now, based on funding, based on market valuation. And over here is all the investors that are backing for all these different solutions. So you can see that most of them are under zk-Rollups. And then also you can see that all these VCs, they're also like, different competition, different camps. So here is an overview of the L2 TVL by technology. And you can see that right now, Optimistic Rollup is clearly the winner because of EVM compatibility. And because you have EVM compatibility, it's so easy for existing DeFi projects to come over, right? You just copy paste your code. So that's why they are leading the market share right now. So here is the TVL by project. So Arbitrum is the winner. Then DYDX is also quite big. So this is under zk. Validium is also part of zk-Rollup. It's just a zk-Rollup with data that is stored off-chain. So you can see that all these are zk-Rollups. So here's the breakdown of Optimistic Rollups. Arbitrum is the winner, then Metis second, and then zk-Rollup, DYDX, then Loopring, zk-Sync, Immutable X, Diversify. So based on the previous chart, we can see that Optimistic Rollups are the winner, right? Most of the applications are on Optimistic Rollups, but that is because of the EVM compatibility thing. But zk-Rollups are ahead of its time, is way ahead. Because a lot of people are expecting that for zk-Rollups to come out with EVM compatibility, it takes years, but they were proven wrong. And it's quite rare to see that technology, especially in crypto, is moving ahead of the planned roadmap. But because zk-Rollup side is making a lot of huge progress in the R&D segment, so they are really catching up very fast with Optimistic Rollup. So this is the map that we talked about just now. So zk-Sync 2.0 just released their zk EVM. Is already on testnet. And you can see that zk-Sync 2.0 curve is already doing all these things on testnet. And then zk-Sync also going to release their zk portal, and this is the data availability part that we talked about. So this will be under zk-Sync 2.0. So now users will have the option to choose whether they want less security but much cheaper, much faster experience, or they want security. Then they will store all this data off-chain. So zk portal, as we talked about just now, all this data will be stored off-chain by all this group called Guardians, which will use economic incentives and game theory using the zk-Sync token. So here is a brief overview of zk-Rollup when zk portal comes. So you can see that is quite a big gap from where Optimistic Rollups are today. And as for Starknet, they are also progressing quite fast. So right now we are on this single app rollup, single operator. So Arbitrum, Optimism, actually everyone right now is using a single sequencer. So pretty much centralized right now, but in the future they would slowly decentralize it. And their step 2 is actually multi-app rollup. So multi-app meaning that immutable, diversify, Sorare, dydx, all of them can talk to each other. It's interoperable. So that's actually the next step of it, because right now they actually, are just single instances. They don't talk to each other. And next is just decentralizing all the sequencers and all the verifiers. And then for Starkware, they just did $500 billion in cumulative trading. This is 500 billion, and TVL is 1.1 billion. And it's really crazy. They are moving really super fast, and their technology is also there. So it's quite interesting to see, how all these different technology compete with each other. And if you want to get exposure to Starkware, there really isn't a direct way right now because they have not announced any token. So the most indirect way you can get exposure to the whole Starkware company, whole Starkware narrative, is to invest in the projects that are built on top of Starkware, that are built using the Cairo programming language. And this is not financial advice. So right now, the the big four main projects are Immutable X, dydx, diversify, and then Sorare. So these are the four projects that are built on top of Starknet. And then for zk-Sync, they have already announced that there will be a token. So you can, use the network and then hope that they give an airdrop retrospectively. Or you can buy some of the projects that are built on top of zk-Sync 2.0. So one of them is, I think, Mute is built on top of zk-Sync 2.0. Quite a promising one to look at. And zk-Sync is quite focused on the privacy aspect of it. And then for optimistic rollups, Metis and Boba, you can already directly buy the tokens. But for Arbitrum and optimistic Ethereum, they also never announced any tokens yet. So you can, use their network frequently and hope for airdrops. Or if they never give, then it's too bad. Alright, that's it for this video. I hope this gives you a better understanding of the overview L2 rollup solutions. What are the different projects? What are the different technologies? And what are the differences between all these competing different camps and different solutions? And if you have any thoughts or comments with regards to the whole L2 ecosystem developments, do comment down below. I would love to hear your thoughts also. And thanks again. If you find this video helpful, if you appreciate the research put behind this, I would appreciate if you can give this video a thumbs up, like, subscribe, share also, and I'll see you in the next one.